copy
have
for
it.
you.
Really? You do? Wow.
So this,
Good war, great men.
and so they flip open the door, and inside of that little cavity is all the workings of a still. I think it died for me is when we would start to go and you could just buy the whole set.
Yes. Yeah, that's
You
when
know,
it ended, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the downfall for, all right, I got the set, but it wasn't it wasn't as fun. It wasn't communal.
Put on your helmets and buckle your chin straps for the wildest podcast held in the Steel City. Dubs and Chicken Hawk will give you a taste of the past in fried jumbo.
When did you come to love history in your local town? Like, what do you think drove that? And what age did you start to realize that was something you were interested in doing?
I have to think that, I point to this box,
Yeah.
like that for my grandmother, my mom's side of the family. So you're familiar with Mahaffey Hill Road.
Yes.
At the bottom of Mahaffey Hill is my family settled there in the late 1800s.
Okay.
So they were one of the first, they were German immigrants. My one grandfather was working on the Pennsylvania Railroad. But my grandmother, my mom's mom, I think she would tell stories because our family date back to, at least here in Pennsylvania, where I can trace an ancestor to building Forbes Road, building
Nuh-uh.
Fort Ligonier.
That's amazing.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
insane.
So my grandmother was proud of that.
Yeah.
They kind of had the stories mixed up,
Mm-hmm.
but I got enough of it to where I was interested in looking into it, like actually documenting it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, it was an obsession. I lived in Philadelphia, and I came across a statue, and it was a General Reynolds. And my grandmother said, "Well, you're related to General Reynolds somehow," and I could never make that connection.
Yeah.
And so I had to really dig to find the true story, and it was a Reynolds, and it wasn't from the Civil War that he fought, but it was a William Reynolds, and he fought actually with trying to take Fort Duquesne
Oh.
from the French,
French,
and
yeah.
he was wounded in this. So it was that type of history that my grandmother.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then I started to look on my dad's side, and that's how I got into Trafford, trying to figure out why my grandfather, came to Trafford, and and then it led to me writing a book about my grandfather's machine gun battalion during
Right.
World War I. So it's just digging into that history.
Yeah. Is that the book that you wrote while we were maybe the last 10 years or so? How long did it take you?
Yeah, so it was. I think I wanted to get it out for the centennial
Okay.
of World War I, which
World
was
War I, 17 or something?
yeah.
or
So
15?
it was. It was in 16 that
16.
when the U.S. entered the war. They went over in 17. The war was done in 18. November of 18 is when, and so I wanted it in that time frame, and I wrote the book, and someone that I knew, similar interests, said, you ought to look at showing this to the Centennial Commission, which was. They were building a memorial in Washington, D.C., and there was a commission that was given power by Congress to go ahead and build this memorial without any funding from the U.S., just private funding. And so I was told, submit this as a potential project. And so I did, and the Centennial Commission said, we love it. Here's the logo. You can use our logo, and you want to promote it as a project of the centennial.
Wow.
And so that, to me, is probably one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of family legacy. That after writing it, because no one in my family really knew the whole story of what my grandfather went through, I certainly started to stumble upon other people contacting me. They had family members who served with my grandfather. We didn't know that, but
Really?
they didn't know the story.
This is fantastic.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun to
Oh my gosh.
get
Yeah.
people from across the country now contacting me saying, "Hey, my family was, member, whether it be great uncle or grandfather or
Yeah.
father was in that unit, and now I know the history."
Wow.
That's
What's the
fantastic.
title of your book?
So I have a
Yeah, you
copy
have
for
it.
you.
Really?
You do. Wow.
So this
Good war, great men.
Let me see.
And this is yours.
Oh,
Okay.
wow,
you
for
got,
Thank
Barbosa.
you.
Yeah, good war, great man. The detailed accounts of machine gun battalion during World War I. That's just fantastic.
I'm looking for something to read.
So my grandfather's on his picture. Normally an author would put their picture on the back of the book. I put my grandfather's picture on there.
That's great.
Look at him. Handsome dude.
So that picture hung in my house as a child.
You were saw this picture all the time.
all the time, and there was another picture that even his battalion photo that hung in my grandmother's house. In fact, in my grandfather's house, and I just remember it as a young kid. It was one of these yard-long, all these soldiers, and the picture was taken in France, and we could always go and we could point out which one was our grandfather, because it was just running around the house as a young kid on Sundays, and we just knew, and it was and so that picture's on the front cover of all these men. Part of it, my grandfather's not on the front, but I wanted to show that mainly the whole unit.
The whole unit, yeah.
And then I have the other book. This is you probably have seen
Yes.
these type of books.
Check this out.
Trafford.
Images of Trafford.
And that was the one that started our historical
This is
society.
the greatest.
Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. I actually went to middle school in Trafford.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I went to Trafford Middle School. So every day we'd kind of go through the city on bus to get there.
So that was at one point, that was even the high school.
Yeah.
That's like what this program is all about. Is just there's a lot of memories from Western Pennsylvania that are going to get lost. And we're not. You did a great job writing these stories, which is great. You're keeping it alive, and our goal is just to try to keep some of these stories, these verbal, like tales, or not tales, but history, or
And your podcast is very much like an oral history.
Yeah.
I listen to some of the stories that you guys tell, and it's very similar to. I'll flip on YouTube, and lately I was researching a young man from Trafford who was killed during Vietnam, and now you're seeing Vietnam veterans. They are now starting to talk about their experiences, and sometimes it's very difficult to watch. But
yes,
so they're getting to the age where I think that they know that they need to tell these stories, and they come together for support. But oral history is important, and I often say that when I get together with some of these guys in Trafford, when we have our monthly meetings, sometimes I wish I had a recorder. I should just turn it on, and let people talk about some of these things. You had asked me like what got me interested, and I can remember I was working for State Farm, and I was living out in Conquerville, and it was one Christmas I came back for the holidays.
Yeah.
And I had an uncle who lived next door, and he was kind of starting to get housebound. And so I left my aunt's house, and we went down with another cousin of mine, and we called him Unc.
Yeah.
And I said, Uncle Joe, and he had a very hard time hearing, but if he understood your question, he would just he would talk. And his oral history, I wish I had recorded.
Right.
But one night he told me some stories. I went home after this meeting, and it was probably after midnight from a family gathering, and I didn't want to lose those. And I took out a pad and I wrote down what I remembered my uncle telling me. And there's a great story I haven't shared with anyone in Trafford, because part of it is I wasn't sure if it was true,
Right.
or if it was kind of I don't want to say made up, but parts of it I wasn't sure. But years later, I found this story, and then I started to research my own notes and the names that were in this. And sure enough, I found articles in the newspaper that validate the story.
Yeah.
One of these days, I'll share it with the community. But there's names in the community that sometimes you have to be careful. Like, if does this family know what their relative did?
Right.
When you guys were talking, I brought something for Todd.
Yeah.
And I'll have to ask him if he knows. He may know the stories of his family bootlegging and in Alarmer.
I think he knows.
Okay, yeah. So you come across those kind of things. But I was interested in what he said, and again, it's local history, that I had never heard about was his
Yeah.
family's tie to the ambulance.
Oh yeah, he talked about that in one of them.
Yeah, I remember
that.
that. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
his
that,
uncle, Grandpa Ted, who,
Yeah.
when we were little, Todd and Bart and I and other kids, we would eat it down at their house. You always went to the grandma's and grandpa's on Sundays, it seemed like. And sometimes I'd be invited as their friend. So I got to know him pretty well. But he was really into the ambulance, the fire station. He started all that kind of stuff down there in Larimer.
and those are the stories that I love to hear for local history because they're the unsung heroes
right?
of,
Yeah.
of the day, and the community service and the give back that people were willing to do that you don't see enough of today. You know,
Yeah.
unfortunately we do. I think a lot of it stemmed from back in the day when there were more social clubs, but they were social clubs for a reason.
Right.
You know, they had to help each other out, and this is pre Social Security, pre 1935.
Yeah.
When nowadays, if a family's in trouble, you know, the government will help that person out.
With some assistance.
Prior to that, a lot of it was these small Italian groups, at least in Trafford, the Italian club, Slovak club, Polish club. You
Yeah.
would join that as a member, and part of your membership was you would get life insurance, and so
Yeah.
there was some form of assistance that was there if a family member passed, who especially the breadwinner would pass.
And a lot of those are still around.
Yeah, they're
like
still
the
around.
National Slovak
We
Society.
passed the Irish Club on the way into Pittsburgh, I think.
It's down in the hollow there.
Yeah.
NSS Life is a company that is a National Slovak Society. They still sell life insurance, you know, and annuities and all kinds of things. Previously, you had to be Slovenian to be a member, but now they open that up to other folks.
But it was those kind of groups that people generally got together to help each other out.
Right.
You know, my grandfather built his house in Trafford, and my dad was at the Polish club one day, and he's sitting at the bar, and an older gentleman said to him, he goes, "You know, I helped dig your grandfather's foundation." You know, so these guys,
Really?
yeah. And then you think,
Yeah.
wow, you know, when I built my house, I don't think I asked my neighbor to come and
Help him dig it
have
out.
him dig the foundation. You
Yeah.
know? So
And
those
they were
type
digging
of
that thing with a shovel.
right,
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
and my grandfather built a Sears house back in the day.
Yeah.
He bought the kit from Sears, and
That's crazy, too. That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
You could buy a kit from Sears
Right.
to build a home.
and he bought his kit. He bought was in purposely it was another apartment upstairs and for his family or his parents to live in.
Yeah.
And
to
then
help
later
them.
on he rented that out.
Wow. Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
There's history that it's like just beautiful gold sitting everywhere, and it's like people are walking past it, not picking it up.
And-
That's what I'm sad about that.
Well, and the reason I mentioned the bootlegging about Todd's family
Yeah.
is because, and this relates to my family's history of the house. When my grandfather built his Sears house, and we didn't know this until a long time after, I should say, my grandfather was deceased, and then my grandmother passed away, and that uncle I told you about, he was
Yes.
still living.
Yeah.
And he said to my dad and his brothers, he says, your grandmother or your mother never wanted you to know this, but somewhere in the basement there's a hidden room with a still.
That's
And-
fantastic.
Yeah. And my one uncle, John, said, Unc's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And sure enough, they went down to the basement, and my uncle said, I know it's in the ceiling somewhere. And those, my Uncle John had a broomstick, and he's hitting the ceiling, and it's thud, 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 and they're looking around, and the one time he goes like that, and a door flips up.
Flips up. Wow.
Yeah, and so they flip open the door, and inside of that little cavity is all the workings of a still.
So it would be sitting in between, like maybe like behind a closet or something, because it was in the ceiling of the basement.
Yeah, so it
on-
was the steps that went up to the
Oh, I
upstairs.
see. There you
yeah.
go. Yeah.
And so my grandfather disguised it very nicely because it's all tongue and groove.
Right.
wood flooring.
Yeah.
So he disguised it perfectly, and he built that during the time of Prohibition.
Yes.
And I would ask my uncle. I said, "Did you guys ever sell it?" And he said, "No. Everything was just personal
family.
consumption." Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure lots and lots and lots of people had stills and
Oh,
things
yeah.
like that all over.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the first time I ever heard a story that someone had one in their house. Yeah.
And I shared that story with people at the Westmoreland County Historical Society. And
Yeah.
last year, when Westmoreland County celebrated its 250th anniversary, they were asking all the local historical societies, do you have a certain object in your collection that you think kind of tells the story of the county, no matter what era?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I have this still, and they loved it because it talked about Westmoreland County's, like the first cash crop was whiskey.
Whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they have it on display right now with all of the bottles and things that came out of my grandfather's house.
That is so interesting. I forget. Todd did mention something about Westmoreland County and whiskey before, but
Would
I
that
can't
have
remember.
anything to do with the Whiskey Rebellion?
It was this time. It was earlier than that.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was earlier than that. But Western PA was known for whiskey, like going
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
way back into history, like even
Colonial times.
colonial times. So that's pretty interesting,
Yeah.
right? This morning we wake up and do a couple of things around the house, and now we're talking about times from 100 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and very comfortably talking about it, which is really, to me, magical.
And that's what I think kind of our goal in a lot of local historical societies, like you said,
Yeah.
making sure this stuff,
Gets told.
yeah. And if you think about it, and I thought about it just when your stuff is out on the YouTube,
Yeah.
it'll be there for I don't know how long.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think sometimes people say, well, why are you doing this? Are you making any money? I say, we don't make any money.
Right.
And we're probably never going to make money. But 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, wherever this recording sits, it could be YouTube, or it could get bought out by someone else, or it could be part of an archive somewhere.
Right.
I've even considered burning it to disc, actually.
We're going to, you helped us go back even further than we've ever gone back, because you're a historian and you wrote books and you've done all the research. The farthest we've been able to go back is like a 92-year-old person telling stories about some of the things that they remembered from growing up and
Right.
stuff. But you even got us back further because you dug into history. It was a personal experience, but it was you having a curiosity, and you seeing this picture. Like if I saw this picture all the time in my grandfather's house,
Yeah.
I'd want to know more about that. That's probably what drove that, like those childhood memories.
Oh, yeah.
You and your families would say, okay, that's him out of that picture or whatever. So you had that picture on the wall, and you're picking him out of there. And in your mind, you're searing something. You're saying, well, I want to know more about that unit or that group of people and what they faced. And that's really what we got to do.
Mm-hmm. It's also the emotional connection that you gather when you're talking with people who share similar interests, and some people just don't have an interest in history, but when they can relate to a certain event in their life that, for example, the first time they experienced a fast food restaurant, like when I was a kid, it was the Winkies in Monroeville.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just have to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
And is that history? Maybe not, but you can relate to certain things like the baseball cards.
Baseball cards. That's another thing I had sort of put away in my mind. We haven't talked about baseball cards on here yet. But we had, instead of using these, which is much better than we did, we just did shoe boxes.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We doubled them up.
Right.
So it would be streamlined in there. We had boxes and boxes and boxes of shoe boxes, my brother and I. And then you'd go to other houses and with your box.
Right,
And you would-
exactly.
You
And
would trade.
that was the
things.
fun part.
Yeah.
When I think it died for me is when we would start to go and you could just buy the whole set.
Yes. Yeah, that's
You
when
know?
it ended, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the downfall for. All right,
Yeah.
I got the set, but it wasn't as fun. It wasn't communal.
Yeah, it wasn't communal. That's the key to all this history and everything
Right.
you're talking about. It wasn't communal anymore. You weren't meeting with someone to say, Well, I don't have Pete Rose of that year. Do you have it? I'll trade you a Hank Aaron
Right.
for Pete Rose.
Right.
Or
Yeah, exactly.
And one time I had a massive score when I was a kid. You're cutting through yards and stuff and all this and that. We were running around somewhere, heading down the playground. We were cutting through these yards, and I see like an old-time baseball card on the ground outside this garbage can. I'm like, oh my God. And I don't know who it was. It wasn't like Mickey Mantle, but then I found all those other ones that were Mickey Mantle and, all the greats from that. Now, they weren't in great shape because they were out in the garbage and got rained on. But I gathered every one of them up and took them home, put them in my box.
Oh.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I had, people started, looking into their storage and attic and cleaning things out.
Yeah.
And apparently it was a little bit of a resurgence of trading cards. I just had, as funny as it sounds, someone we were talking baseball cards, and and I said, I have some. I'm trying to complete a 1972 top set. And he said, I have some 72s, and we got together and we traded.
Did you really?
Right. And
That's great.
And I'll have to tell you later who that was because, but it was just something an interest that resurged.
Oh yeah. So you still have all yours?
I do have them.
Oh, that's a blessing. What a blessing. 'Cause those things are awesome. Do you remember the Arco stations?
Oh yeah, sure.
Back in the day, they sold these pirate, or they didn't sell them. They give you the pirate portraits of the pirate players.
I don't remember those. I remember I have the Isleys had the players on them. It was a round disc. I don't know what they were used for, but they were.
Right, I do remember those too.
They had, and then also the RC Cola had players on the can.
Cans, right.
Yeah, and that was a perfect can for making a Polish cannon.
Yeah,
because
it had a heavier metal,
and it didn't have the crimping on.
Yeah,
the
right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, maybe when I was listening to that,
did you guys make them too?
We did.
Oh, it was crazy.
We used. I think Stoney's was the perfect can for.
Yeah, it was thick.
Yeah, and
you needed a thick metal, like a thick gauge metal.
Yeah.
Man, you could fire them things out a mile. But I was thinking that Arco thing. They had like portraits of each pirate player.
Yeah.
This is back when Roberto Clemente. So I would have been young. I mean, he died in like 71 maybe or 2 or somewhere in there. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, 72 I think.
Yeah. So I would have been 4 or 5 years old, but I remember my brother was 3 years older than me, so he's 8 or 9, and we would make our mom only go to Arco for gas.
Right.
Because they would give you
yeah.
like Bob Moose, and you would get a picture of, Willie Stargell or, whoever was on that 71 team.
Right.
And I think my brother still has those. But they're really nice. They're like big portraits. They're like a big baseball card.
It's such a small world, and you don't realize it until you start talking to other people. Even a lot of people obviously grow up in this area and they move out and move to a different part of the country, and people gravitate toward where you're from, and I'm from Pittsburgh, and you start to narrow down where I was in Washington D.C. and I ran into a former congressman who came by a table that I had set up for this centennial, and I recognized him right away, and we just started talking, and it's exactly what he asked me, where I was from, and he knew exactly. He was at a ceremony at Norwin a few years ago.
Okay.
And he talks about the people that he would run into from all over the country that were from Pittsburgh, and he knew exactly, where they were from, and that's a big thing about Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Like, did you see the Raiders game the other night or other day?
Yeah.
I didn't watch much of it, but I watched some highlights. It was all Pittsburgh people there.
Yeah.
All the way in Las Vegas. Wow. It was probably 70%.
Yeah, one of the followers that we have on our Trafford Historical Society Facebook page, Jay Vaccaro, and his father Sonny Vaccaro.
Yeah, Sonny Vaccaro.
And Sonny's so that was a big story for our town, was the movie that they put out last year with Matt Damon plays Sonny Vaccaro from Trafford. So the story is pretty fascinating, that this young guy from Trafford ends up making the deal to sign Michael Jordan to Nike.
Wait, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah,
It's a movie.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I know about it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story, and he came from our small town of Trafford.
I never knew.
Our family back from my dad's side, the Fleming side, all the way to Glasgow, Scotland is where we're from. And it's funny because Chicken Hawk, who is on here, he tracked his back to within like a street or two of where my family
Oh,
lived.
get out.
No.
That close.
Yeah, that
Whoa,
close.
my goodness.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, came here around the same time
Yeah.
when the shit hit the fan in
Well,
Scotland.
you said your family was a Stewart family?
Well, my dad is Fleming. Okay, so there was just him and Smelts on his side. On my mother's side, there's DiMarzo, which is Italian, and then her mother was a Stewart. And there's a million Stewarts that were raised down in East McKeesport, that little, I'm trying to think of the name of that little town there. But just up behind Niagara is there.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Right there by where Eastland Shopping Center used to be
Yeah.
years ago. I'm trying to think of the name of that. Something Valley. Green Valley. That's
Okay.
the name of it. It's a little tiny nook,
Okay.
like your nook from Trafford. You know,
Right,
you
right.
lived in your little plan there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in East McKeesport, there was a little plan there called Green Valley, and it was like a big horseshoe thing. And all of them sort of grew up down in there, as and they're Irish.
Yeah, the Stewarts, Trafford first, was first part of North Huntingdon, so that was,
was?
North Huntingdon was that area, and there was one rail station, which Stewart Station,
Okay.
and so the Stewart family farmed there, and that's my family. They leased the farmland off the Stewarts,
Oh, okay.
and then Westinghouse came in, bought all the land, the Britton farm, the Stewart farm, and wherever they wanted to build that town and the factory, but so they annexed it. So then, Trafford became its own borough and separated from North Huntingdon Township.
So Westinghouse almost created a borough and built housing and things
Yeah,
like
it was
that?
a company town.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah, George Westinghouse, their planners came in. They called it East Pittsburgh Improvement Company.
Mm-hmm.
So they were advertising, we're going to sell lots. If you want to build a house, you want to build a business in this new town, we're building a factory in Trafford.
Mm-hmm.
And one day they opened up the doors, and it was a land rush, and people ran and stuck
Staked their claim.
made their claim in.
That's the neatest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah, and they made their claim, and there were people they bought it that one day, and they would immediately turn it over to someone else to make money on that lot.
Wow.
And it was pretty fascinating story, and
Yeah.
and they had company. The company built houses, and there's pictures in that book of some of the and I believe it was the Stewarts actually that different family that were the construction company that built a lot of the houses.
Yeah. Stewart's a big name in this area.
Yeah.
Because we grew up with a family of 6 kids that were Stewarts in Irwin. I wonder if I'll have to talk to Mr. Stewart. He's still living. He's probably in mid-80s. He would probably know if he was related to the folks that did some of that work down through there.
It's one of the neat trivia items that I found in Trafford history is in do you know what the Steelers were called before they were called the Steelers?
I don't.
No.
They were the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So they were Pittsburgh Pirates, and then I think I'm thinking around the 40s. I have to look. I can't remember. Rooney said, we got to change the name because we don't want to be similar to the baseball team. And they put out a contest in the press to name the next. What do we want to name this team? And so the contest they came up with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the very first team to ever play this new team called the Pittsburgh Steelers was actually the Trafford City alumni team. So,
That's the greatest thing I ever heard of.
yeah, and it was just one of those,
Neat
some of the
things.
older people in Trafford that I asked my dad. He goes, "Yeah, I think I knew that the Trafford team played the Steelers." And one of my clients, his father was on this team,
Oh, really?
and he didn't know it was the first team. He knew that he played on this Trafford City alumni team, but I think the Steelers, they whooped him like 78-0 or something like that. But it was one of those. It was actually run as a charity game in Duquesne, and one of the players who was from Duquesne. He was raising money for the Duquesne Police Pension Fund.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, so just again one of those quirky local history
Yeah.
That's
that
fascinating.
you wouldn't think of.
No.
No, not at all.
So in all your pursuits with history and experiences with State Farm and things like that, what do you attribute, or what do you think was your finest moment or gave you the biggest chill when you finished a project or worked through?
What came out of that book, it was obviously Good War, Great Men. It's to me the fact that that's in the the Library of Congress, and I'm hoping 100 years from now there's going to be someone who has this interest like myself, wanting to research their family's story about the war, and they're going to find this book, and then they're going to learn. 200 years ago, I know one of my ancestors was in this war, and they had no idea, but they're going to find this research, and they're going to learn about their family. And then I guess more recent, after writing that, I really started to look at some of the ancillary stories that were related to these men. And there's one that I'm proud of, that I wrote a story. It was during the pandemic. You're sitting at home, not a lot of, so I started writing a story about a young man who was served with my grandfather. His name was Joe Duff. Joe was he wanted desperately to serve in the Army, and he was an All-American at Princeton University. Played football. He ended up coming back to Pittsburgh, and his brother had a law firm in Pittsburgh, and his brother James would later on become the governor of Pennsylvania. But this young man, James Duff. So Joe he went through officers training, but he had bad eyesight, and they wouldn't let him in. So he ends up enlisting, and so he's already college educated, and he gets connected with my grandfather's unit during the war. And at the time, a lot of the officers, infantry officers, they were getting killed pretty quickly. And so they said, the orders came above, we need you to find officers. And in the stories that I learned, it was this Joe Duff. He was just a standout type of person. Before he went to the war, he was actually the head coach of Pitt football.
Oh, wow.
And so, unfortunately, during the war, he was maybe 4 or 5 days into him getting into this position as an officer. He was killed. And his father in Pittsburgh was a pastor, and there was another gentleman, a Marine's father in McKeesport. They said, we want the bodies of our sons to be returned. And I wrote a story for Heinz History, their Western Pennsylvania magazine. And it's a story of these families in Pittsburgh creating a group called Bring Home the Soldier Dead League. And you think about it, it's kind of a strange name, Bring Home the Soldier Dead. But the soldier meant anyone, whether it be Marine, Navy, but they wanted the bodies to be brought back. And there was a lot of delay in doing that. So I wrote the story about that on the 100th anniversary of that event. The story was published in their magazine, and unbeknownst to me, they entered this into the Western Pennsylvania Press Club, and I ended up winning a golden quill for writing the story. And then it was my son was home from training, and we were down at this awards banquet, and it was getting late. And the very end is they do the best of show, and they're going through the categories. And I'm thinking, we should leave because it's really getting late, and this is kind of not our cup of tea. And sure enough, they call my book as one of the best in show in that category.
Wow!
So to me, that was just a
hair-raising moment.
Yeah, it was. And I thought, wow, this guy, I didn't think that I had it in me, but I think that I would imagine that just the passion I have for telling these stories is what came out in the story.
How did you get the confidence to, take all this on? I mean, you just, were you always a writer?
No, what's funny is I was always C average in high school, and I didn't even think I wanted to go to college. But the best advice my dad ever gave me, funny thing is my dad was a State Farm agent, and he rented a space in his building to the United States Marine recruiting.
Right, the recruiters. Yeah.
So, I go see my dad, and I walk down the hallway, and my friends and you go in, these guys are squared away. I mean, they are sharp-looking guys, and I gravitated toward that. These guys knew it. They carried confidence.
Yes.
And
exuded it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was 17, and I had to get my parents' permission to enlist in the Marine Corps. And my mom's kind of hesitating, and I said, "Well, I'm going to do it when I'm 18, so you can do it. You can sign now or not."
Yeah.
And my dad said, "Well, why don't you consider going into the reserves?" I said, "If it doesn't work out, and try college. You can go do college and Marines at the same time." And he says, "If college doesn't work out, then you can always sign up and go active duty.
Right.
But you can't do it the other way."
Right.
So I took his advice, and I signed the contract to go into the reserves. The next year, I started at Penn State McKeesport. And again, I was not a good student out of high school, so they put me in these kind of remedial.
I had to do that at Allegheny College. I went into a remedial program. Yeah.
And one of the classes I took was a creative writing.
Right.
And Dr. Siki was our professor, and what I found was, he'd give us an assignment, and he was starting to read the stuff in front of the class, what I was writing.
Wow.
And my goodness, you want to talk about a boost in confidence.
Yes.
That was it. I mean,
and then you were hooked.
Yeah. So I thought, wow, I didn't realize I kind of had it in me, and I used to kind of journal. I don't journal like I used to, but now I just I don't consider myself. I'm a novice, really, and so to get an accolade from the press club like that.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I love to write. Luke loves to write.
Yeah.
He's a writer in college, and that's what he loves to do is write screenplays and direct. He wants to direct movies and things in the future. And he runs this podcast and everything like that. But I there's something special about putting a piece of pen to paper, and you start with nothing, and you come up with something that maybe can bring somebody to tears.
Oh yeah.
Or enlighten their family for the rest of their life because they couldn't find any information about anybody, and and then somehow they hear about this and find out that their great uncle was part of something so spectacular.
Right.
You changed their life forever.
And I've become friends with members of the Duff family.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just special. They were happy that we were, or I was remembering, their great uncle.
Yeah, that beautiful sacrifice he made for all of us to be able to sit here and enjoy our days. People's had to sacrifice tremendously for that.
Absolutely.
And most were, maybe second generation here. You know what I mean? That's the thing that really blows my mind about the wars and things. A lot of the folks or most of the folks that fought those wars were in another country, or their parents were in another country, a generation prior.
Right.
But they felt so much love for this country because of the freedoms that it bestows that they were willing to sign up eagerly to defend this freedom.
That's what I took from Joe Duff. He wouldn't.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah, he knew that it was important.
Yeah.
Just the idea of democracy, and back then it was empires.
Yes.
The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Right.
The people who were, it's the very, very wealthy, rich.
Yeah.
Wanted to maintain that, and then
control.
Control and the very poor, and here these guys were willing to fight for something that was not started by them.
No, but they knew that it would be a free society for their children and their children and then their children. I really hope people start digging into things like what you wrote and what you do with the Historical Society, because these freedoms we have and this wealth that was created in this country didn't come without a cost.
Right.
It was paid in full by the generations before us. So, you know, I just want to thank you for what you did with all that, and thanks for coming in here today.
Thank you for
sharing with
coming
us.
in. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
It was great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I've known you a long, long time, but I didn't know how deep your commitment to your community has been. And I know on the State Farm side, but behind that, you have got hours and hours and hours and hours of work into this stuff. So thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah.